Hey everyone, welcome back. Now today we're going to be starting something new, and hopefully it's going to be a continuing series. And it's going to be dealing with the legends in aquatics. Now you guys have seen some of my Masters of Aquatic series, and that's one where I could sit down and actually have that conversation face to face, but today we can't do that with the climate of the world today. So I was able to reach out to a very dear friend, a definite expert, a definite master, a dear friend named Mr. Willem Heijns in the Netherlands, and we sat down and had a long conversation about his many contributions to the world of cichlids. He has spent countless hours in Central America observing these animals. All the video that you're going to be seeing, all the underwater footage, is 100% credit to William himself. I encourage you to check out his YouTube page and his pages on Facebook. So without further ado, my good friend, Willem Heijns.
This guy is definitely earns the title of Legends of Aquatics. So, Willem, you got to tell me the story. How did this all start for you?
Well, like many other people, I didn't keep any fish until after I got married, which is, by the way, just about 50 years ago. And the first aquarium that we had in our house was the one that my wife took home with her when she quit her job, because we were expecting our first child. And she came home with a tiny little Perspex aquarium, maybe 5 or 6 gallons, and it had black mollies in there. And my first reaction was, well, dear, this is your fish, this is your tank, and I'm not interested. You just go about, do anything you'd like to do with it. So we put it somewhere in the living room, and it was sitting there, and every once in a while I would watch, and then all of a sudden, I saw there were not just these 5 black mollies in there, but about 20 or 30. And I said, well, hang on, these fish have babies. How did that happen? Oh, well, it just happened, she said. So, okay, that's interesting.
Did she sit down and talk about how it happened?
Yeah. So we bought ourselves a slightly bigger aquarium, maybe 20 or 30 gallon, and we put in the black mollies there, and that was okay. We added some tetras and some other small fish, and it was okay. And then at some point, we went to visit a colleague of mine, and on a Sunday afternoon, I'll never forget it. And we went to his house, and he had an aquarium too. And we sat in front of the aquarium, and there was a beautiful pair of firemouth cichlids, Dorictis meeki. And I said, oh, this is a beautiful fish. And he said, well, I don't like it at all. I said, well, why not? He said, well, they breed too much. I have too much young fish of that. And remember, I was happy about the first 30 black mollies that I had. And here I was sitting talking to a guy who said, they breed too much. I want to get rid of them. Do you want him? He said. I said, well, okay, I'll take him. But it was a Sunday afternoon. We were sitting in his room, in his living room, having tea, and his wife wasn't too happy about him keeping fish. So when he started to open up the lid of the aquarium and take out the woods and the rocks and trying to catch those fish, she was really annoyed. But he just went on, and we had nothing to put the fish in. So we had some glass containers from his kitchen, and we put the 2 meekies in there, and I took them home with me.
And you put them in with
his floor was all wet, and the carpet was wet and all that. And he said, well, let's go home quickly before we are involved in this argument they were developing. So we came home with the firemouths. I put them in my tank, and 2 or 3 days later, all my black mollies and tetras were gone. So, well, hang on, this is kind of a specialty that I'm into. But I still thought they were beautiful, so okay, then it's cichlids from now on. And by pure coincidence, they were Central American cichlids, and I never left the Central American cichlid scene again. So that's how it all started.
So the wife, it no longer was the wife's tank, is what you're saying?
I don't know. I didn't follow up on what they were going through, but so we had this aquarium, and the mollies were gone and the tetras were gone. So I thought, well, I better add some more cichlids. So I bought myself a pair of what is now called Andinoacara pulcher, then still in equidens, and they were beautiful too, but they were no match for the firemouth. So I changed them, and I bought myself a couple of Jack Dempseys, and they were doing much better. And so it grew and grew and grew. And of course, I was breeding them, so I had the young fish. And where do you put those young fish? Well, you cannot leave them in the tank because they will be eaten or starved to death. So I said, well, then maybe I should have another tank to grow out these little youngsters. So we got ourselves another tank, and we put it on the attic on a room on the second floor. And then another tank was added, and so it grew bigger and bigger and bigger. So, and then I asked myself, well, this is all kind of interesting, but where do these fish come from? They come from Central America. So what is Central America really? I started to ask myself. So I started reading about it, and I found out Central America is really a peculiar place. It's a small land bridge between two huge continents that hadn't been in existence for very long, maybe a couple of million years. In fact, the gap between North and South America only closed 2.5, 3 million years ago. So the next question I asked myself, if my cichlids come from this area, how did they get there, given that short amount of time they had to reach that area? And that's when it all started, that I started to go asking questions: how do fish get there? How do they evolve? And how many species are there in this area? And all that. And I started reading about that. And there was another thing. As a hobbyist still, I was kind of feeling I was in competition with all these cichlid fanciers that kept Malawi cichlids and Tanganyika cichlids, fish that all came from one large lake somewhere in Africa. And I said, well, isn't there any lake in Central America with which I can do the same? And there was Lake Nicaragua, or as I prefer to call it, Cocibolca. And I was fortunate to find out that only 14 species of cichlids were to be found there. So then I set a goal to myself. I said, I want to keep all these 14 cichlid species from Cocibolca. And that's something that no Malawi fancier or Tanganyika keeper can ever say after me, saying that they have kept all the species from that lake. Even then, we're somewhere in the 70s, you know. So I started collecting these fish in the local fish shops, and then I got into contact with an everlasting friend of mine, Don Danko, in the United States, and he was offering through the Trading Post, I think it was, he was offering, yes, Cribroheros longimanus, at that time still Cyclosoma longimanus. Yeah. And that was a cichlid from Lake Nicaragua. So I said, oh, can you send me some? He said, sure. So I said, how much do I have to pay for it? I said, well, if you send me a box of fish that I'm interested in, I'll send you this box of longimanus, and we'll do it free of charge, closed wallets. I said, okay, we'll do that. So we started shipping fish at a regular basis, maybe once or twice a year, and we've done that for many, many years. So I got my longimanus. And then there was another thing. I had good contacts with the Rotterdam Zoo, the Rotterdam Aquarium Zoo at that time, and they were organizing a big cichlid show. And the manager of the aquarium said to me, will you help me getting these fish for this exposition, this show that we're planning? Said, okay, how shall we go about it? He said, well, we'll have to go to Germany where all the wholesalers are, and you can accompany me in my car, and we'll go to these wholesalers, and you can advise me on which fish I need to buy. So, okay, I'll do that. And we drove in his car a big Mercedes, and he had a wallet full of Deutschmark, no euros then, a pocket full of money, and we went to these shops, and I was like a kid in a candy shop, seeing all those cichlids there that I've never seen before. And of course, I wanted to advise the zoo manager on which fish to buy, but he said, well, if you see any species that you're interested in, and they are good for the show, why not buy a couple of extras so you can take home with you? That's how I got my first Parachromis dovii and my Neotroplus nematopus from that trip
Yep.
to Germany, and I started breeding all these fish, and I'm adding a few tanks more, so I kept more and more cichlids.
At
And then at some point,
at that point in time, did you know that the dovii and the Nitroplus had a sympatric relationship in the lake? You knew they were both from that same area?
No. I only learned that years afterwards.
Okay.
When I started reading about them, I'll get to that in a minute, because the next thing what happened was that once the show was running, and we were invited, of course, to go there as many times as we want, and they at some point I noticed they had a group of Vieja Macalicauda there. Mm-hmm. And I had never seen these Macalicauda before. And I said, oh, well, what are you going to do with these fish after the show is closed? And he said, I don't know. I said, oh, I know. And I said, you can give them to me. But then the funny thing what happened was, being a public zoo financed with public money, he was not allowed to give any of his live animals away to the public.
Okay.
I said, so if I cannot get them from you, how can we do this? And he said, well, you can get them on a breeding loan. I said, what is a breeding loan? I said, okay, we'll give you a couple of these fish. You can have them. They will still be owned by the zoo. You can have them, you can breed them, and you can do anything you want. So I came home after this show with 5 specimens of Macalicauda, 2 males and 3 females. I put them in my tank, which was a 200-gallon tank at the time. And the 2 males immediately occupied opposite corners of the tank. Yep. Each of them chose a female, and the 3rd female would have to hide in the middle of the tank. And they started breeding. So okay, now Macalicauda breeding. So I bred a lot of these fish, and I had maybe 2,000 or 3,000 fry of them. So then my problem was, what am I going to do with them?
Exactly.
So I started advertising them. You can have them for, well, not really for free, but for very little money. Yep. And I sold many of these to Dutch hobbyists. And then a guy from Berlin in Germany, which is about 500 miles from where I lived at the time, got interested in these Macalicauda. And he said, can I have some? I said, sure. But you'll have to come and pick them up from my house. And if you drive these 500 miles from Berlin to where I lived at the time, you can have them for free. Yeah. And you go, okay, well, I want to do something in return. I said, okay, bring me some fish if you want. And then he brought me some beautiful specimens, big ones of the fish then called Cichlids Sint-Spilum. It's now Vieja Melanurus. Yep. And he brought these to me. And so the whole thing started rolling, and I got more and more fish in exchange from other people. So it was really good.
That's the best.
We're somewhere in the
trade back and forth, right?
Yeah, that's what you do among friends. And then my German friends, I think you've heard of the names Rainer Stabikowski and Uwe Werner and Hans-Günther Breidor, the guy who has got Vieja Breidor named after him. Somewhere in the early 80s, they started traveling to Mexico on fish expeditions. But they had to leave from Amsterdam Airport on their trips. And I lived very close to Amsterdam Airport. So I said, well, okay, if you come to me with your cars, I will take you to the airport so you don't have to pay parking tickets at the airport. And I will take care of your cars for as long as you are away. And when you come back, I will pick you up from the airport. You can come to my house, and we'll have a look at the fish. And then you can take your fish home with you. So many fish of their first trips stayed at my house because they were grateful for me taking care of their cars while they were away. And so I got many more fish. And then I started to exchange all these fish with Don Danko again. Yeah. Because you didn't have these fish in the United States at the time. So this whole exchange program lasted for maybe 10 or 12 years. So I got ever more and more fish. And then I ran into a book because I was getting more and more interested. How did these fish evolve, and how many species are there, and where did they come from? There was a book published by a guy called Thomas Thorsen. And the book was called Investigations on the Ichthyofauna of Nicaraguan Lakes. And as you remember, I'm still interested in Lake Nicaragua, Cocibolca. So this book was of real interest to me. And it's one of the books that I've read maybe 10 or 15 times in a row, just to find out how these fish evolve and how they come about to live in these lakes in Central America. Not just the big ones like Cocibolca and Cholotlan, but also the smaller crater lakes, Apoyo, Giloa, and all that.
Was that
So I got all
your first kind of foray or real introduction to understanding evolutionary systematics? Was that the first book that really kind of whet your appetite for that stuff?
I think so, yes. Well, I didn't have many books. Well, I had the hobby books by Wolfgang Steek and some other guys from Germany. But the real book that had scientific papers in there was the investigations book. That was really the first book that got me interested in the science of all this.
How did you go from being hobbyists like that to actually you going on these trips? I'm assuming you went with some of those other guys at one point in time. You just finally said, I got to go and do this myself. But you in some of your DVDs, like the Mexican one or the Nicaraguan one, the one that you did, some of the the things that you found were groundbreaking type stuff, things that scientists don't see. The real passion and the thing that I find so interesting about people like yourself is you're a hobbyist first, and then the science comes afterwards, and you get so involved and intrigued by the science, but you know about the fish, how they work, how they breed, their behaviors, how they interact. But the scientists, on the other hand, they deal with dead fish in jars. They collect.
Well,
You're on the other side, and you saw things that no scientist, nobody's ever seen before in your DVDs. And it was groundbreaking. You know what I'm alluding to.
Yeah. Well, wanting to build the bridge between science and the hobbyist, it really stems from the job I was doing. I was in ICT. I've been a programmer. I've did all things with computers that you can imagine, like the mainframe, the big ones they used in banks and all that. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I ran into was that the language we use as specialists, as IT specialists, was barely understood by any what we called users.
Yeah, true.
And I said, that's strange. I can talk about assembler language and compiling and whatever things with the ICT business, but nobody seemed to understand that. And I said, well, there must be a way of making ourselves better understood as technicians for the people who we really work for, like the people working in the bank. Mm-hmm. And I tried to do that. And once I left ICT, I went to another job in the bank that was closely related to IT. And I was, as one of the very few managers then, I was able to understand what all these IT people were saying to us, because I'd been an ICT man myself. And that's when the sparkle came that this is what I want to do. I want to build bridge between some profession, ICT, when I was still working, and the banking business. And that was translated into my hobby when I started to get interested and learned a lot about science. That, well, hobbyists don't understand this. And hobbyists are not really appreciated by scientists, and the other way around. All I have to say is name changing, then you will understand what I mean by scientists not being understood by hobbyists. I said, okay, well, I can teach the hobbyists to go about behavior and studying fish a little more like scientists, and make them better understand each other. And that's what I've been doing ever since.
You do it really, really well.
Well, thank you.
No, thank you. That was really the premise that you and me had talked about trying to get together to do the video. It's not the fact that, and I want to put you on a soapbox, but it's, you're world renowned for what your contributions are as an author, your contributions in regards to the amount of fish that you've bred and disseminated throughout the hobbyists and stuff like that freely, not just locally, but also internationally with people like Don Danko with the Ohio Cichlid Association. And then in turn, those fish got disseminated out to other people as well. But your contributions on the scientific side, I call it armchair ichthyology. And it's basically taking a hobbyist, because as I mentioned, most hobbyists pick up a science, like a monograph or something like that, or some sort of revision on a genus. We'll use like Sven Kullender's genus when he did the revision on Cyclosoma. You hand that book to anybody, and they won't get past 3 pages without having
No,
to
no.
about a dozen words. There's no chance an average hobbyist can pick it up. And that's not intended to be insulting to anybody, but like you say, from the IT standpoint, it's an entirely different language. And me, having grown up in that scientific community side through university, mostly with the plant side, but also a little bit of the ichthyology, I fully understand that stuff. And I remember, I have the Sven Kilder's book right there. I got several of his monographs here for revisions, and I used to read those at night before going to bed. Like that was my daily reads with that stuff.
Yeah.
You have an innate ability to take all that information. You had to really classically learn yourself, train yourself. You didn't go back to school to learn this stuff. You taught yourself all this stuff, and you've been able to adapt all that information and put together on your social media pages and possibly websites, things. You put all that information out there 100% for free. And this is countless hours of investigations, countless hours
of yes, it is.
Different materials. And you put it out in an extremely organized fashion, breaking down from the original museum specimen right up to today's modern nomenclature and stuff. And every time you present it, it's just, I can just sit there in shock and awe that the amount of effort you put into some of these things. So I bet you there's scientists out there that applaud those kind of efforts, because you have more things to contribute to it than just a scientist sitting in a lab dealing with dead fish.